What's up, everybody? It's Heidi Fang here, your takeaways host for the Vegas Nation podcast. We're brought to you by Station Casinos, STN Sports. Download that app today. I'm very excited for this show, particularly because I am joined by the NFL Network's draft analyst. That would be Daniel Jeremiah. Move the Sticks on Twitter. You can find all of his mock drafts, of course, on NFL.com. They're doing shows leading up to the draft with Path to the Draft with both Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. In addition to that, the NFL Network will carry live draft coverage from Kansas City during the 2023 NFL Draft, April 27th to 29th. So let's go ahead and get this started with Daniel Jeremiah, who joined me to discuss all things Raiders and the NFL Draft. So first of all, I just wanted to start off with understanding your rankings, which clearly are not really indicative of where you have them going in your mock drafts, but it's a massive undertaking, kind of ranking all of the players that you do, getting to evaluate all of them that you do. When do you even start compiling this kind of a list?
Yeah, it's a great question. The watching starts early. When you think about the fall, starting to watch these players and kind of work through it. In terms of putting the first list together, I really don't put that first one together and really start stacking the players till we get to December. Once we get to December, they've played the bulk of their games, and you start to get a little bit of a feel for some guys. And at that point in time, you start stacking them and get that initial board put together.
So from your initial board, I'll get to what I saw in your mock draft 1.0 and then the 2.0. But for the 3.0 version, which came out just a couple of weeks back, you have the Raiders at number 7 going with Tyree Wilson. How did you deduce picking him at that spot for the Raiders in this version of your mocks?
Yeah, I mean, to me, again, we'll see how this thing continues to evolve and grow. I think Tyree Wilson's one of the best players in the draft. And when you look at last year, the Raiders and the investment with Chandler Jones and doing the Charger games and seeing the Raiders up close twice, and then studying them throughout the year. And I don't know that they got exactly what they paid for with Chandler Jones. I think there's still the hope there that you can see a little bit better from him. But to me, getting somebody to complement Max Crosby, a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, to go along with some of the other needs they have. You could look in the secondary, you can look on the offensive line. I just know when you put the hierarchy of positions, it starts with quarterback and then it goes to defensive front. And this would be a really talented player to add to their group.
Well, that kind of answered my second question because I realized Bucky Brooks had put in Christian Gonzalez there at number 7 for the Raiders. So if you're saying they need to really fortify those front lines, that makes a ton of sense as to why you would go that route as opposed to going with the cornerback. How important do you think that is, that especially when you look at the example from the Super Bowl with the Eagles and the Chiefs and how those lines really held? Like, what is so important there about not maybe picking a cornerback at 7 versus going with the defensive end or an edge rusher?
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, you can make a case for corner, and I get that. If you have a corner that's graded higher, I have no problem with taking the corner, over the edge rusher there. But to me, if it's the other way around, or if it's close to even, I'm always a believer in building front to back. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the two teams last year. You can't have enough rushers. The best two pass rushes in the league were represented in the Super Bowl last year, and both those teams roll guys through. It's so valuable. I'd rather have a great defensive line and average corners than to have it the other way around.
And so I wanted to go back to your first mock draft, the 1.0 with Pete Skoronski, offensive tackle, and then the second was Will Levis. What did you take into account when you made the decision to kind of change those iterations from player to player for the Raiders?
Yeah, some of it depends on what happens ahead of you. When you go through the different iterations of the mock drafts, you kind of see the players become more crystallized going through the process. You get to see them at all-star games. You get to see them work out. The team's needs become more crystallized based off what they do or don't do in free agency. So all those things kind of, lead to stuff happening before the Raiders pick, and that can impact what they end up doing. The nice thing is when you have teams picking up there in the top 10, they've earned it. They've earned it by having more than one need. So you can go in some different directions.
The quarterbacks this draft are pretty exciting, from Anthony Richardson just showing out at the combine and keeping it up during his pro day to obviously CJ Stroud looking pretty polished, Bryce Young, Will Levis, a lot to like there as well. What are the chances that you think 4 quarterbacks could possibly go like in the top 10 of this draft?
I think you're very high. I feel strongly that we're going to see quarterbacks go 1-2. I feel strongly that the Indianapolis Colts, after riding the wave of veteran stopgap quarterbacks, need to commit to a rookie. So I feel like those are 3 spots right there. And then if you count those as 3, let's call them, likelies, then you only need one of these other teams to jump in the mix for all 4 to go. And when you have cases to be made for Seattle, cases to be made when you look at 7 with the Raiders, and then you look at cases to be made still with Atlanta at 8. There's Tennessee, who's lurking at 11, who could possibly move up into the mix at some point in time. So I think it's likely we see 4 of these guys roll before the top 10's over.
So if you're the Raiders and you want to get one of them, obviously the idea might be they would need to trade up from 7. How far up would you think that they would need to go if maybe they're looking at getting, let's say, Anthony Richardson at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think 3 is probably where you'd have to go to lock it in. And that's a team in Arizona with so many holes. It makes a lot of sense for them to trade out. So that would be the target to me. It wouldn't make as much sense to go to 5, because if the Seahawks are willing to trade you 5, that means they're not going to take Anthony Richardson. So then you can just sit and hold your water and, and take the chances that he would get to you there at 7. So, I think a lot of that will be determined when those teams are on the clock. But if you want to lock it in and you want to be bold and aggressive and make sure you get your guy, that 3rd pick with Arizona is the one you got to go to.
I just wonder if the Lions would play any kind of tricks at that point.
The Lions could very easily auction that off to a team, as we're talking about. Maybe it's Tennessee, maybe it's a team like Tampa trying to get up there. Minnesota's, as a quarterback team that's doing some homework. So, there's always going to be risk. Sometimes you just sit tight and it works out for you. Other times it behooves you to be a little more aggressive.
How much capital do you think, if the Raiders do move up to, that 3rd spot, would they need to use to be able to get that with the 12 picks that they have? And probably future.
I have it all. I have it all in a document.
Okay.
I don't have it right in front of me right now, but
sure.
I mean, that's to get there. You're it's not cheap. But I think you could do it a combination of stuff this year. If you want to mix and match with stuff this year and next year, I think a lot of these teams end up putting together, sometimes, up to 3 proposals and say, okay, here's a combination of stuff this year, here's a combination of this year and next year, and here's a combination of maybe a player and some picks. So you kind of just give a little buffet option there and see which one they want to take.
We have a couple of picks that are a couple of quarterbacks rather that are names that might be second day, maybe even beyond that. But I wanted to get your take on how they might fit in the Josh McDaniels system. And those guys' names are from Stanford, Tanner McKee, and then Fresno State's Jake Haener. Do you feel like one over the other could be a good fit in Josh McDaniels' system if they were not to go and give all that capital up to try to move up and get one of these top quarterbacks?
Yeah, I actually kind of like Jake Haener's fit there. As somebody who processes extremely well, he gets to his progressions fast. He's accurate. He's a good decision maker. Poor Tanner McKee, the offensive line was so bad at Stanford. He got his teeth kicked in playing behind that group. So it's a tougher evaluation with him. But I think just in terms of that system with Josh McDaniels, having some responsibility on your shoulders and being able to get quickly through your reads and get the ball out on time and accurate, I think that's really Jake Haener's strong point in his game.
Okay. With Darren Waller having been traded from the Raiders, they picked up, I think, the 100th pick from the Giants on that. But they've also added Austin Hooper. They got OJ Howard. Do you feel like the Raiders are not done yet at tight end? This is really a tight end rich draft when you look at the talent. Is there one, do you think they're done there that they may go seek out a tight end? And 2, is there somebody on the list that you think could be a real asset to the Raiders at that position?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I think it's a really, really deep group. I think there's double-digit guys that'll end up being starting tight ends, which is pretty unusual. I think it's the deepest group of tight ends we've had in a decade. So yeah, even though having a couple guys already on campus, so to speak, I think there's a chance where they could upgrade the position and they could get a nice young piece. And I don't think they necessarily have to do it really early in the draft. I think there's going to be guys all throughout the draft. I love Sam Laporta. He's probably going to go in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
You look at into the third round. Tucker Kraft is a really good player out of South Dakota State. That might be a spot where you could land him. You've got Wiley from Cincinnati, who's an intriguing player. He's probably in that fourth round range. There is a whole host of these guys to choose from, and they're going to be all throughout the draft. So I think it'd almost be a mistake not to take one because the value that's going to exist this year.
Yeah, I have a couple of fan questions for you from the Raider Nation here that wanted to get your take on a couple of things here. First, if the Raiders go defense with their first 3 picks, say cornerback, defensive tackle, and linebacker, is there enough depth to draft 3 defensive starters? That one comes from Raider 365.
I would say corner is good. Defensive tackle depth is not great. Okay. And then was linebacker the other one? Was that the other position?
Yes.
And linebacker is not a great year for linebacker. So I would feel, if you wanted to take one early, I would probably go with a defensive tackle early. I think you could then find an edge rusher or a corner, if you wanted to go that way. I think there's depth at those positions. But, to me, I don't think you're going to be able to hit everything on that checklist with where they're picking. So I would go defensive tackle and then corner. I think you'd get 2 of the 3. I think the linebacker, I think that's more of a mid-round guy. You take a flyer on someone, but it's just not a great linebacker draft.
Okay, the next question is from Michael Rodriguez. If the Raiders are thinking of trading down, what could they get in return in draft picks, and who would they be targeting later in the first round?
Yeah, that's a good one. Again, if they decide that they're not in on the quarterbacks and one of the quarterbacks were to get to them at 7, I think you'd be open for business and you could say, okay, well, you could get to 11 with Tennessee and get a corner that you really, really like. You could get, you could go back even further. I would say, you could go back into the early 20s if that was Minnesota, a team like that, and still come away with a really good corner like a Deonte Banks. I think that's probably about his range of where he would go out of Maryland would be a really good value and add some future picks. That would be my goal. We can look at the chart. You can pull it up and look at the trade chart and see what that would net them in this year's draft. If I'm the Raiders, I think I might even be thinking more big picture and saying I want to try and collect as many assets in next year's draft, which, as we forecast, looks like it's going to be a really, really strong group.
Yeah. Especially right there, a quarterback. We just talked about quarterback, but
Yes.
Caleb Williams, my goodness.
Yeah, that's a good lottery ticket. If you're going to buy a lottery ticket, that's a good one to buy.
Yeah. And a couple more I had that I just wanted to get your take on. When you look at a guy like Lucas Van Ness, he's somebody that obviously is still growing, has a lot to develop, but where would you see him fitting? How do you look at a player like that I believe you had ranked at 12 and then think of his potential in the NFL and how quickly he needs to develop?
Yeah, I mean the comp for him is pretty cut and dry. Like if you look at his numbers, his size, and all of his measurables and all of his workout numbers, they're almost identical to Rashawn Gary coming out of Michigan and went to the Packers and then, unfortunately got hurt last year. Might even have been in the Raider game for some reason. I'm trying to go back and look at that, but he was on his way to having a really good year. You're seeing him get better each and every year. Didn't have it all figured out, but was a tremendous athlete coming out of college, who played hard and played with effort and just had a lot of talent. I think Van Ness is maybe even a little further along than him coming out of college, but he's that type of a player. Somebody who's going to be able to play on the edge on early downs and then has the ability, if you want him to, let him rush inside and rush over a guard on passing downs.
And my last question, Jalen Carter, what is the consensus and discussion around his name right now, given some of the red flags that have come up, as well as with the pro day? I know early on he was looked at as probably the number one overall, but I've seen his stock pretty fall. Not dip really far down, but about to what, five,
Yeah.
I believe. What is the kind of buzz around his name right now?
The interesting thing about him, I would say there's consensus about him as a player, and that consensus is he's the best player at the draft. Every team that I talk to, if you just say talent wise, who's the best player, he's the name that comes up. And I had it the same way as you mentioned. He was a top player for me. Now, when you put in the troubling stuff that you find out about, I knocked him down a few spots, but I have a hard time seeing now that whole issue has been resolved and it's been finalized. Um, from a legal standpoint, I think he's got a really good shot at going in the top 10. When you have guys that don't do workouts for teams outside the top 10,
Right.
makes you wonder if there's been some sort of a wink wink nod agreement with somebody picking in the top 10 that he's not going to get by them. So I'll look at it from that standpoint with his talent ability and the fact that the legal situation has been resolved. I don't see him getting out of the top 10.
Daniel Jeremiah, thank you so much for your time at Move the Sticks on Twitter. Pat to the Draft, tons of lead up shows on the NFL Network for the NFL Draft taking place in Kansas City, which the NFL Network will have live coverage for April 27th, of course, the first day, all the way through to April 29th. Daniel, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thanks. It's great to catch up. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the draft process. Kansas City be here before you know it.
Okay, can't wait. I really can't. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time
Thanks.
today. That'll do it for today's show. I'd like to thank everybody so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you are listening or watching if you're on YouTube. Also, we'll keep you updated with everything happening leading up to the draft, after the draft, all of your coverage here on vegasnation.com, your home for fast takes and smart coverage of the Las Vegas Raiders. Everyone, that'll do it for me today. I'll be back next week.